Good afternoon and welcome back to the final session of day one of the Virtual Summit 2023. I hope you've enjoyed all the sessions so far, and just to round off the day we have one final session taking a look at BIM, bridging the gap between BIM for manufacturers and also construction collaboration. It's a really exciting topic that I'm quite keen to talk to you about just because it's gaining a lot more traction. We're seeing it so much more in terms of the clients that we're working with, and we've been able to help them actually educate them, be able to deliver what they're after with their clients, and ultimately just fulfill the projects that they've got coming up. So in today's session, both myself and Robin will be taking you through from a process point of view and then actually looking at some workflow parts a little later on. I'm Nathan Brown, the Sales Director at Man & Machine. I've been here for 7 years, and in terms of my experience, I've talked to businesses a lot more in the construction industry over the last probably 5 or 6 years, helping them develop in terms of BIM strategies, actually understanding what it is that they're trying to ask their supply chain to deliver and ultimately meet their clients' goals. So a very good understanding in terms of the processes, the change that actually is required as well, and I'm able to help in terms of actually give you a few pointers this afternoon in terms of actually being able to take you through the different elements there. Robin will then come onto the workflow side and looking at that interface of taking things from Inventor into Revit and that transfer of information. So to kick things off, you just seen a video before we started. That was a recent study that was conducted by Autodesk where they took a look at the state of design and make and actually put together quite a conclusive 55-page report. That was released I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so late April. And it was actually talking about all of the different change within manufacturing, within media entertainment, within construction, and actually looking at what's important to you. So what are the industry pressures that we're seeing? Aside from what we're here to talk about this afternoon about BIM, what are the things that we're starting to feel at the moment? They were kind of highlighted, they were highlighted in that video, and they were kind of highlighted in terms of these 3 key areas: sustainability, digitization, and also upskilling your team. Now, why is that important in terms of actually what I'm talking to you about? Well, we're starting to see an influx in terms of a generation where they have a good understanding or technological understanding, but also in terms of actually like workforce, that desire and that need to actually have people that are able to deliver the projects that you're working on and deliver the work that you're after. In some elements there is a skills gap, and actually investing in your organisation and looking at the pressures, it will start to actually mean that your business and organisation modernises and are able to deliver and are seen more favourably by your supply chain. There's a lot more information. If you go to Autodesk website, autodesk.co.uk, and you'll be able to find the State of Design and Make report on there. It's a free download. I definitely recommend you go and have a look. So what are the other pressures, or why are we actually looking at this more holistically? Now, within manufacturing, and especially with people I've worked with many years ago, on the manufacturing side and talking about that BIM and digital transformation piece, manufacturing has always been one of the industries that are quite far ahead. Early adopters of technology. How do we make things quicker, cheaper, faster? How do we actually use less materials but also actually keep the quality of the work as high as possible? Now, technology plays a big part in that, and if you look at construction, there is a real need to actually adopt the technologies, adopt the processes, and actually use some of the software and technology that's available to their organisations to streamline their business. Now, why am I mentioning that? And that's probably a fair question, but that will always tend to come back down to what information is on a project, what information do they have about materials, can they create what's known as a digital twin? And that's something that we're starting to see, or that's a term that we're starting to hear about more and more. I was at an event last week at Digital Construction Week, and it's very much a hot topic in terms of that digital twin, that 3D or that virtual building that's available there that has all of the information. Now, the construction industry and all of the different disciplines will not be able to produce that information unless they work with product manufacturers to actually specify all of the things that are important to them. And that's really interesting when we take a look at all of the industry pressures currently. If we start to take a look at actually what's going on in the world, the introduction of AI, artificial intelligence. Now, that's been in the news an awful lot over the last few weeks. for good and for bad reasons. I think ultimately I've always seen it as a bit of a gimmick. AI, when it first came out, I thought, okay, how are we ever going to be able to actually use this meaningfully and effectively within our workflow? I've obviously been proven wrong, and it's certainly something that's becoming more and more prevalent. But again, that will come back down to manufacturers providing the information, and then the construction or different disciplines within the construction workflow then being able to actually use and manipulate that data. You've also got a few other things in terms of off-site fabrication, off-site manufacturing. Again, it's been in the news for a lot of reasons. Now, traditionally, home builders have really struggled in terms of being able to actually produce and guarantee that quality of builds. You don't have to go too far when you look online for some real horror stories and to hear things that just shouldn't really happen. For one reason or another they do, and ultimately the construction or specifically the home builders are looking to digitise their workflow and actually look at new ways of taking or delivering their projects. Off-site fabrication or manufacturing offers that, being able to actually have a factory where you can deliver those projects or deliver those houses, and you have all of the more skilled workforce in one place and being able to do that. You stick on the back of a lorry, wherever it may be, and you send it to site, and you can put it up, guaranteeing quality of build, timeline, but more importantly, there's no rework. So again, actually looking at that, it then comes down to how are we adopting technology, or how is the industry adopting technology, and then feeding that back into the supply chain and the product manufacturers. To actually look at this more holistically, I think we're talking about areas where there has to be an interest from that organisation. So what direct pressure is being put on? Because that's the important part. Without direct pressure, we always know that things can take a lot of time to change. Organisations, workflows, ways of working, all that type of thing. So what direct pressure is being put on the construction industry? You probably recognise some of these terms. Now, for a couple of them, they've been directly impacted from a picture that I showed on my previous slides. Grenfell. That was a horrific set of events, and what's come out of the back of that in terms of the Hackett's report has meant that we've started to see change within the industry. We've started to see BIM processes being forced on organisations that typically didn't have to actually adhere to them. So for any project that's delivered over 6 stories high, the recommendation at the Hackett's report was that they'd have to follow and adopt BIM processes. We've started to see golden thread of information. We started to see that feed into the Building Safety Act in 2022, so just last year. And that started to actually govern and make a lot of change within the industry. We've also had the Fire Safety Act in 2021. There's a lot of things going on that now mean that there is a real pressure on construction industry or the construction industry to modernise their techniques, to follow and adhere to BIM processes, and ultimately that then means that the requirements then fed down into their supply chain. Coming to talk to them as suppliers, the product manufacturers, whatever it may be, they are starting to actually ask for and have a lot more requirements from them. So what does BIM actually mean? Really interesting point. We've just spoken about this, or the change for the last few minutes, but what is BIM? Not BIM level 2, I've heard of that quite a few times when speaking with clients more recently. BIM level 2 was superseded a number of years ago. I have people say to me, oh, we're doing BIM level 3. BIM level 3 was never defined, so I've no idea where that's ever come from, and I think that's just a term that sometimes people coin. As you can imagine, that tends to start creating doubt or creating confusion when people start to work with one another. What we now have is a set of ISO standards, ISO 19650. These are ISO standards, not what BIM level 2 was in terms of PAS and guidance documents. We have ISO standards. They're being added to and being amended and updated as we go. So over the next couple of years, I think they'll start to settle down in terms of actually what that means. But what you now have is the ISO 19650 standards that makes up the UK BIM framework. The UK BIM framework was put together by Centre for Digital Britain, that has now been disbanded because they've reached their goal, BSI, and also you have Building Smart. Building Smart are the international organisation responsible for BIM and for digital ways of working. The UK arm of that was the UK BIM Alliance. They were the organisation directly involved in the UK BIM framework, but they have just now actually been rebranded and are now called NIMA, N-I-M-A, if you want to search that online. So you now have the UK BIM framework, and I encourage you to have a look at some of these standards. 19650 is the core one. You can start to see the popularity of actually what BIM is in the UK when you look at it from an international point of view. As you see from the graphic that has just appeared, 800,000 visits. Clearly, the UK construction market is leading the way in terms of BIM adoption, which sometimes it can seem crazy in terms of some of the projects that I see or some of the customers that I'm working with. But if you want to have a look for yourself, go to ukbimframework.org and you'll be able to find more information, and you can actually read the more up-to-date standards. Rather than me just sending you to a website though, so what does it specifically mean for you? Now, you have different annexes or different elements of the ISO 19650 standards. Clearly, from a product manufacturer point of view, you're going to be involved in the actual data that's transferred, or the information. Looking at COBE, takeoffs, looking at information that you're supplying on your models, that's going to be a good place to start. Depending upon how far you get involved or how ingrained you are within the workflow with the different contractor, if you take on some design responsibility for a specialist portion, then there's going to be other elements in there in terms of information management and how you start to feed into those. You can find more information, as I said, on the website. Go and have a look there, but by all means, use the chat box this afternoon to pop your questions in, and we'll make sure we'll answer them hopefully a little later on today. So what does this actually mean for me? I'm a product manufacturer. I need to produce the information. I've been asked about BIM. Don't know any more than that. Where should I start? Now, what I've tried to do with this graphic is actually just to steer you in terms of the core areas. So you have uniclass information, which is a standardised way of actually classifying all of your information. Definitely look at level of detail, level of information for your non-graphical and graphical information. That then starts to feed into COBE takeoffs and COBE information. And also one area which I would encourage is 3D models. Now, 3D models isn't a stipulation within the BIM workflow. It never has been. It doesn't have to be 3D models. You can do 2D information if you're doing, like, say, electricals or piping. That would be absolutely fine. But it's about what your client wants. Always ask that before you actually embark on this journey, and just make sure that you really understand actually what it is that you're being asked for, and ultimately you can deliver it. It will stop you spending a lot of time needlessly going down rabbit holes, but ultimately you get to the point of what your client requires and you can deliver that. The reason I put 3D models on here is because whilst it isn't stipulated, the technology is starting to change in terms of the adoption from people like architects, people like interior designers, office fit outs, whatever it may be. They are using the Revit model or the 3D model to actually visualize and create a space that all it will do is read the information from the product manufacturers. So in terms of the information you're providing, they are using that for a visualization point and to actually sell that idea to their client, which is great. It means that people can actually look at, in terms of space planning, they can actually look at it in terms of actually get a feel for the room and the area, but more importantly, they can actually see your products in a lot more detail rather than just a square or a blob on a 2D drawing. So yes, look, I appreciate that in terms of the conversations I have more frequently when someone says, oh, BIM's just Revit, it's not, it's more than that. It's about the information and it's about the process. And there's two elements which clearly I'm talking about the process this afternoon, and then we'll come on to the workflow point of view from there. So just a final point from me, last slide before I hand over to Robin. Now, there's two kind of camps when you look at BIM for manufacturing. You have your product-based workflows where you have doors, windows, chairs, office furniture, anything like that, where you're delivering a product that is literally you're manufacturing and then you're trying to get it specified on a job, or you're trying to get it actually sold to your client. You then have your design-based workflows. Now, these are specialist portions that you undertake for the client or for the contractor. They will ask you to actually produce 3D drawings or produce a system or produce your products within that actual space. We start to see that with shutter doors, with HVAC systems. I mean, there's many areas you can go down. But the one bit of advice that I'll give to anyone that's starting this or looking at this is realise in terms of which area you're in, and actually look at this from a very much a holistic point of view across the organisation. In terms of what BIM means for you, now it's always good to actually set up and understand what you're actually requiring. BIM isn't just for design teams. BIM moves into commercial teams. They need to know ultimately what your clients want, agree to it, and they're actually able to deliver it. There isn't anything more stressful than someone from the commercial team or sales team signing up for a project or getting a client on, agreeing that they can deliver something that we know that you just can't do, and they've just, yeah, we can do that, that's absolutely fine. Let's have a sensible conversation, and more often than not, they might speak to that client, or you might speak to that client, and when you get to the crux of things, they're actually looking for something much more simplistic themselves, or they're just not very well educated. So there's an opportunity for you to actually work with them and actually drive some meaningful change from there. So before I hand over to Robin, that is my biggest bit of advice. Always understand what you're looking at, what your client is requiring or requesting, and then always look at it from a holistic point of view. Get a team within the organisation that is going to actually make this change, because you should only have to do it once. If you make the change once, that's more than enough, and ultimately that will give you the long-lasting value in your business. So I'm going to hand over to Robin now. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the session today. I'll be back on a little later to round off, but yeah, I'll hand over to Rob. Thank you.
Great, thanks Nathan, and hello. I'm Robin, Technical Director here at Man & Machine in the UK, and finally it's a pleasure to be on the camera for a reason that isn't fixing a microphone, fixing some echo, or fixing the video quality. So it's great to be with you this afternoon. So I'm here to show you some technology around Inventor and Revit interoperability. And what that means is essentially looking at the two life cycles, or the two types of workflow that Nathan's just discussed. We've got those of you that they just need to get a 3D model out there. They model a piece of furniture, or they model almost an off-the-shelf product that they need to provide in a format that's friendly for digital construction, whether that's Revit, whether that's another application. We have a workflow that suits product manufacturers from Inventor, and it actually works really, really well in 2024. The other end of the spectrum is those of you that are getting more involved in project work. And again, we have some fantastic workflows between Revit and Inventor, which leverage things like the Autodesk Construction Cloud to make your collaboration and your modeling efforts as a manufacturer, as well as the collaboration of that design into the construction space, so much easier than it was before. And I'm just excited to share those for you for the next 20 minutes or so. And the technology just continues to surprise me, really. I mean, the stuff that I'm showing you today, I guess it's not too dissimilar to things that we've shown before on these kind of sessions. But if we look around some bits that Nathan said earlier with regards to AI and what that's doing within both the manufacturing and the construction industry, not a week ago I was speaking with the general manager of ElmTech here about some new plugins for SketchUp and Revit that will render with artificial intelligence. And you just say, well, there's the model, and I want a moody setting or a modern setting, and it'll actually go away and use artificial intelligence to build you a visualization of your model. And actually the results are pretty exciting. So, you know, there's a lot out there, and technology really continues to push forward. So without any further ado, let's jump into it and show you what we can do inside of Inventor. And the workflow that I'm going to start with is the product workflow. So I'm inside Inventor. I'm going to open an A typical assembly, and we're going to use that assembly to create a Revit friendly file from the Inventor interface. And again, as Nathan said earlier, let's imagine that you're almost an off-the-shelf product provider, whether it's a piece of furniture or a piece of electrics or something like that, and you need to provide that model in a friendly format. What we need to do is think about the detail level of that particular component, as well as the information level of that particular component. And what I don't want to get into today is really the amount of information or clarity that's within that environment, but we do have individuals here, both within the manufacturing team and in my construction team, that can really help you dig into the detail on those standards and figure out what it is that you need. But for the purpose of today, we're going to keep this really high level and just focus on the technology. So I'm in Inventor 24. In honesty, a lot of this functionality isn't new. A lot of this functionality is improved on year within the Product Design Manufacturing collection. So whilst I'm using Inventor 24, any of you out there who are using Inventor, even back as far as 5 or so releases, will have a flavor of what I'm about to show you with inside of those tools. So I'm using a very simple assembly here, made by Demir from Autodesk. So thank you, Demir, for the assembly, although it's a bit of an old one. It seemed quite useful from this particular example. So we're going to imagine that I am a kitchen designer, and I've got a really simple kitchen cabinet that's been modeled up inside of Inventor that maybe comes in a few different sizes and a few different shapes and flavors. The first thing that I need to do as a product manufacturer is figure out, what information level and what detail level do I need to, or do I want to share when I push this out to something like Revit? Because the temptation as a manufacturer, and certainly as an Inventor user, is, well, you can have it all. I've got a model here that's to the nth degree of detail. It has every single nut, bolt, washer, bell and whistle on there, and I can provide all of that if I want to as a Revit model or as an industry foundation class model. But actually we need to look at what's useful and what's helpful, what are people going to need to use inside of their designs. And actually, for the most part, what's most important is certainly the main geometrical shape. So in this case, something that is very rectangular, and it has nominal widths and nominal sizes. But we can chop and change that detail level using the simplified tools that you saw have been improved inside of Inventor 24 in Cameron's session earlier on today. And alongside that detail level, it's the information. Again, as a product manufacturer, I know everything there is and everything there needs to be known about this particular product. So I can provide any level of information that I might want to. But again, it's about getting the right balance between overkill, death by information, and the right amount that's going to be useful for the people using it. The great thing here is this uses Inventor's bog standard functionality to do this. So when we're working in Inventor, we use a mixture of eye properties and we use a mixture of model parameters to yes, control the model parametrically, but also drive information into our model. So just by opening up this design, I've got information about the physicality or the physical information of the file. What material is it? What's the center of gravity? What's the mass? But I've also got access to project-specific information and also custom information. For the most part, if I'm wanting to add some metadata pertaining to digital construction, I'm gonna need to use those custom eye properties. And we've got a whole different, many different ways that we can drive those. I'm gonna do it very manually today, purposely. Anyone that joins me on the M-Word sessions on Thursday will know that I'm kind of let's just do this simply and show you how it can be done. But there are a number of different ways that you can drive this should you want to, such as automated on a form, driving it through iLogic, importing it from Excel, and all sorts of other options out there. I'm not going to add a load of information because we just don't need to for the example that we're showing today. But let's just add maybe a couple just to give you a flavor. And one of the first things that we're probably going to need to do, certainly in the UK, is add a uniclass code. Now, Uniclass is a common classification system that's used for digital construction, not just in the UK, but other countries around the world as well. And a Uniclass classification is made up from two pieces of information. You have a code, such as a PR product code or an SS system code, so on and so forth. And that code is linked to a description. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend I know those codes or those descriptions. Some of my colleagues that are far more handsome and intelligent than me certainly do. But I'm going to make one up today for the purpose of this. Apologies, I feel a little bit bad for that, but don't hold me to it. So we have a Uniclass code. So I'm going to add Uniclass code with a value of PR, and then I'm just going to add some X's in here. Okay? And I'm going to say add. So I can add a code value to this particular product. Okay? Against that, maybe I'm also going to add Uniclass description. And against that, I'm going to add a value of a kitchen cabinet. Again, there would be official Uniclass codes that you can get from the MBS website and use to your requirements. There may also be some COBie information, such as warranty duration or warranty guarantor or something like that. And again, for this, I'm going to say that we want to say a warranty duration, and we're going to go with a value of 3 years being the actual value. But essentially, we add the information. Again, you could script this in iLogic and get it to add all the parameters and even add some values if they're static across many of your designs. But what I'm going to do is press apply and close. So we can add information to our model. And once we've got that, we then want to think about the way that this looks. Now, we can simplify that using the simplification tool. Cameron showed this fantastically earlier, so I'm not going to go to the nth degree of showing all of the different options in here. But this has been tweaked and adjusted over the years by Autodesk to really suit the product design for construction workflow. In other words, we can very quickly come in here and say, well, I just want to replace that whole thing with an envelope that's got a nominal width and a nominal depth. And if this is a conceptual part of the project or early design stage, that might be enough for what the designer needs to put this into Revit and do some space planning. We can then look at doing that a little bit further, where we can say, well, take the individual components and compartmentize them, turn them into envelopes. So I've got a bit more of an idea about what this thing's going to look like and the space needed to pull the drawer out or open the cabinet or whatever it might be. But again, it's very simple. It will simplify the shapes. The last thing we want is all of the fabrication information from a surface perspective, like threads, curved handles and stuff like that inside of Revit, because we just don't want that level of information. For the purpose of this, I'm going to be naughty and I am going to push that level of information across because I can. But what I'm going to run is some of the exclude components. So I can exclude parts by size, and I can start, saying that if there's anything less than 100 or less than 50 or whatever it might be, I can tell Inventor to get rid of those parts. Okay. As well as that, I can say that I want to get rid of all holes, I want to get rid of all fillets, I want to get rid of all chamfers, internal pockets, embosses, and anything else that from a manufacturing perspective is useful, but when it comes to exporting this to Revit or certainly to the Industry Foundation class IFC format, it's not going to be happy if you've got 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 of these in the model. It's going to start to struggle. So I can simplify these and press OK. What this will do is it will create a new part file, which will be a representation stored against my representations in Inventor. If you're using a slightly older version of Inventor, that will be in your level of detail. If you're using a slightly newer version of Inventor, that will be within your representations on the left. And as you can see, my output here is a component that's far simpler, without holes and things like that. Now from here, I'm going to go in and just export that out. So let's go to my environments. Let's go to export my BIM content. So from the environments tab, we can click export BIM content. And we have a load of options at the top here with regards to connectors. So if you're in the HVAC industry or if you're in the electrical industry, we can add data connections, power connections, we can add air connections for inlets and outlets, duct connections, so on and so forth. And it's as simple as specifying a piece of geometry, the direction of flow, and the type of connection that you need. That will come across inside of Revit and typically do what it is that you need it to do, which is great. We're not doing any of that. So all we need to do is tell Revit how to work with this file. So we're going to go to Author Building Components. I'm going to use the model origin with regards to the orientation of this part. And we need to classify it. Now, this is quite American, which is a bit of a shame from my perspective. Hopefully there's someone from Autodesk listening that can understand that we would really benefit from a uniclass table here, not an omniclass one. Been saying that for a few years, but nonetheless, this allows us to classify inside of Revit. Forget the fact that there's an omniclass number there. We don't use omniclass in the UK. This is allowing us to tell Revit what component this is going to be. So I'm just going to do a search for cabinet. It will search across here, and I can go and find casework cabinets here. Great. Press OK. Then we have information. So this is our level of detail, and here is our level of information. I can choose to enable model properties in here to include things like the uniclass code, the description, and the Kobe warranty information that I added earlier. Okay? Press apply, press OK. And again, we can customize and tweak that, and you could even go as far as to going into the back end of the system and editing some XML files and some other configuration files to build that automation out even more. If that's interesting, reach out and we'll tell you how. After you've authored the building components, we simply choose export. And from that perspective, again, I'm just going to say just use the full component here just for ease of use more than anything else. And I'm going to go ahead and save this on my desktop. We've got three options with regards to files. Now, don't pick the wrong one, is what I will say here as a user of both Inventor and Revit for the past 20 years or so. Don't pick the wrong one. When you're exporting a product like this, you want to use either a Revit family, an RFA file, or we want to use an ADSK exchange file. Don't use an IFC. An IFC, an Industry Foundation class, is there from a Revit perspective as part of a bigger aspect of the building. So if you were doing an entire MEP design or an entire structural design or some very specific cabinetry or carpentry design that's much part of a bigger thing like some facade or something like that, then use an IFC, not for one individual component, because it will not work the way that you would expect it to or the way that you would want it to as a manufacturer inside of Revit. So we'll pick the RFA and we'll hit save. Again, I'm going to get a couple of warnings just because I'm being a little bit off the cuff here, but I'm going to say yes, and this will then sit here and export the file. Okay, it's a fairly simple design, so it shouldn't take too long. I'm running on a fairly high spec machine, and this will just go away and export that out to my desktop. We can then show you how we can very easily place that inside of Revit, and that's our first workflow done. So that's our product. How do we take something in Inventor, get it to the right level of detail, get it to the right level of information, and then push it out to a format that's usable in the construction space. And naturally, we're going to use the Revit format because we're Autodesk. So if I just head over to Revit, and I'm just going to start a completely bog standard Revit project, an RVT. Revit has two types of file. A family is a component, like a piece of furniture, or a TV screen or something like that. An RVT is a project. It's a building or a much bigger part of the building. And all we're going to do is say, go to component inside of Revit. I'm going to load in a family from the desktop. I should be able to find my iBase cabinet here. Choose open. Give it a couple of seconds and you can see that cabinet there on my mouse. If I place that on level 1, let's just rotate it around by 90 degrees and place a second one. You can see it works like any other Revit component would. Let's go across into 3D and zoom in. Yes, I've exported it in all of its glory. I decided not to use the simplistic model that I created just to save myself a little bit of time with saving and exporting and configuration as we are live and on time limits this afternoon. But as you can see, it comes across really well. Even this one that does have all of the bells and whistles in it and holes and fixings, it comes across really nicely. You just wouldn't want that level of detail X amount of times in the model. These are models that exist inside of Revit, but they're not parametric. If you need your components to be scalable and parametric inside of Revit, build a native Revit model, end of story. These allow you to take a single design from Inventor, place it inside of Revit, work with it inside of Revit, and it works really well. Alongside that, it works within the Revit workflow in that it's now parametric to that particular level and works the way that you would expect. If I select one of those components and go to its type properties, a type is all instances of that component, an instance is that one instance. If I go and look at its type properties, we can see that if we scroll down here and find model properties, we have all of those properties that have come across from Inventor, including the uniclass code, the uniclass description, and the Kobe warranty duration. There's some things that you might need to do to rejiggle those inside of Revit as a Revit user, which we can do with Dynamo. It's basically changing the property sets that they sit within. But generally speaking, it works well, right? I mean, maybe it's just me, but from my perspective, as a bit of a geek, I've got a fabrication design. I can send that detail to the level that we want with the information that we want. I chose all of it, and we push that straight through to Revit, and it works well. Fantastic, great. But what if you need to do more? What if you're on the other side of the workflow and you're actively involved in construction projects? You need to get involved in more than just providing a single design for someone to place in their model. What if we're designing a shop floor fit out or something like that, and actually we've got to do a whole load of carpentry, or maybe it is a bespoke kitchen design and you want to model that around the space that you've got. Inventor and Revit communicate with each other and allow you to work on that premise. I hope I'm not overrunning, because I'm just going to keep talking because, 5 minutes, is that all I've got? I'm going to overrun, but I think we'll be okay. So this is the second part of the workflow. I've got a very simple model here that I threw together yesterday inside of Revit. Okay, so we're going to imagine that this part of the building here is a kitchen, and I'm going to place some componentry together inside of Inventor to suit that space. Now, because we're a little bit limited on time, what I'm going to do is reuse some files that I created yesterday just to save the process. But we're imagining that I have a design, or I have the need, to manufacture a design for that very specific space. So in Revit, I'm going to create a view that is customized, apart from it's not, which is customized to suit that space. In other words, I'm going to select maybe some components. With those components selected, maybe I'll use the section box, and I will create a view that only shows the information that I want it to show in that view, which is the kitchen space. I save that as a very specific view inside of Revit. I'm just going to close some of these down here. Now, I'm using the Autodesk Construction Cloud for this model. So on this particular design, what I've done is uploaded it as a cloud model to Autodesk Docs. Autodesk Docs is the common data environment in the Autodesk world. It comes within the Autodesk Architecture, Engineering and Construction collection. And what I've done is I've uploaded from Revit that particular file. You might imagine from a collaboration perspective, you're shared a Revit file to collaborate or coordinate with in the manufacturing space. This is that file. What I can do within that file in the Construction Cloud is I can view it. And as the administrator on this particular account, or maybe the architect or the principal designer or whatever it might be, I can come in and look at a given view inside of the Construction Cloud, and I can say that I want to create a data exchange file using that particular view. 2 buttons, 1, 2. What that will do is it will create a very small size file that contains the information that we need to read into Inventor. That essentially means that if I get rid of these models that I had open earlier, I can go to the Collaborate tab in Inventor and I can choose Data Exchange. This will log into my Construction Cloud, so you'll need to have access to that project where they're stored as a manufacturer. But I'm now in Inventor interrogating the common data environment Autodesk Docs to see what information is available to me. Now I'm going to pre-apologize. I did a few of these yesterday. So there's a lot of files because I had some issues with my internet at home yesterday. So what I'm going to do is come in and just choose this one here. Ordinarily you would only have one, not several. I can grab it and I can say preview to have a look what's in there if I want to. And from that preview I could explode it, I could interrogate it, And I can get all sorts of additional information should I want to as a manufacturer before I say, hey, yeah, I want to use this in Inventor. I'm going to press load. What this will do is it will load that information straight in as a link, so it keeps a live reference in Inventor. So here's the view that I created just now inside of Revit. And here it is as a cloud-linked model through Inventor. That's a live link. If they update that on the CDE, Autodesk Docs, it will update inside of Inventor if you tell it to with the right click. And as you can see, it understands all the ceilings, the doors, the windows, and all of the information about that about that Revit file. So this is the Revit file in Inventor, or the portion of it that I need for my coordination. It's worth pointing out that whilst I'm using the Construction Cloud workflow, you can also do this just with the native Revit model. Just insert the Revit model natively without the need for the Construction Cloud if you would prefer. So from here, it's Inventor geometry. So I can start putting section views on here. So let's grab this one and move it in just to get rid of that wall. And then let's come in and place, I'm just going to place a couple of cabinets just because it adds something to the workflow. So let's go to assemble, let's place in that I-base cabinet. It's an I part that we've got here, so I'm going to place in here a standard 600 unit. Let's place it in, and let's also place in a standard 400 unit and place it in. Once they're in, again, this is just an Inventor model. So whilst I've got a big old building there that's referenced, it's just Inventor. It'd be nice if the colours were the same. Hey ho, you'll have to let me off. I'm just going to put a couple of constraints on really quickly. So we'll use the back wall here that's at an angle, and we'll constrain this to the back of one of these cabinets. So let's just select other and grab the back face there and constrain that to the back wall. Perfect, let's apply. Let's just drag that up and say that we want to have a mate between, I should have put a section box on here rather than a single section plane. Serves me right. Let's grab the bottom foot there and mate him to the floor. And let's grab the wall and mate that one to the back side of this cabinet, which is not that one, it's that one. And then we're going to go with an offset. Oh, feet and inches, terrible. Let's go with a 1 foot offset. Press OK. Was I on flush? What have I done there? Well, it should be from there to there. Mate, offset, 1 foot. Should work. Why don't you work? We'll go with it. So you imagine there is an offset there as well. Fantastic. Then we're going to place another constraint on here, and we're going to say that we want to flush the front with the front. Fantastic. Flush the top of this cabinet with the top of this cabinet as a flush, please. Thank you very much. And then what did we do? We've done the front with the front. I've done the front with the wrong front, never mind. And we're on there, mate them together. Mate the side to the cabinet there and the side of the cabinet there. Great. So there we've got our components inside of Inventor. If we go to inspect and measure from the side of the wall there to the front corner, just here, we've got 1 feet and inches again, apologies. We've got 1.6 foot. If we come in and look at the distance there, I'm just going to copy that because my memory is terrible. We have that saved. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now be quite lazy. So I'm going to go to environments. I'm going to go to export BIM content. It helps if I remove the face of the building first. I'm going to just suppress this link and hide it for the purpose of this, because we don't need that on. And then we're just going to export our design. So imagine that I've got something far more tremendous than what I've got here. I am going to change that flush there because it's going to annoy me. Let's edit and change to you. Thank you. And then we're going to export this out to Revit. So environments, if we went in here and exported, we only get RFA, IFC, or ADSK. You could go out to an IFC if you wanted to. I don't need to because I've got native Revit and I want to produce native Revit. So we don't need to go out to that export building components. What we can do is go to File, we can go to Export, and we can choose RVT. And what that allows us to do from the assembly is export out a Revit project, should we want to. That came in Revit in Inventor 2023. Both options actually work really well. And actually, why not? Let's use an IFC. Let's use something that isn't native Revit, which is going to probably show this off better than the other. So let's just save that assembly away. And it doesn't matter what format you use, essentially. This is going to allow us to export that entire building, and we can save that to our desktop. Now, with the bigger workflow, I am overrunning. Apologies, Simon and Nathan. But with the bigger workflow, what you would do is take this and push it up to Autodesk Docs to allow them to coordinate with it as part of the wider workflow. I'm just going to be lazy and just use standard Revit just to bring it back in, just for the purposes of time. But because what I've done is I've got a Revit building. That Revit building is around some northings and eastings and an angle to true north, and it has coordinates. Inventor doesn't work off those real world coordinates. Inventor just works off a 0, 0. But the key is when I bring in the Revit model, I'm constraining that to my origin in Inventor. So Inventor's 0, 0 is either the project base point or the survey point or whatever you're using inside of Revit. Meaning if you're then collaborating and coordinating around that building from a Inventor perspective, it's actually doing that in the right location inside of Revit. So if I go to here and either link the Revit file, or in this case, because I've been quite brave and chosen to link an IFC, when we choose to open that up, what it's going to do, with a bit of luck, is it will link in that IFC file, read that IFC that Inventor has produced. Again, you could do a native RVT if you're being asked to produce Revit content natively. I didn't simplify the components, which won't please the IFC. Typically, there we go, it's in the wrong place. The joy of live demos, but I came prepared. So let's get rid of that one. Unload and reload you. The joy of live demos, but hey ho, you'll have to let me off. It's late in the day. Let's reload. Come on. Reload. Reload. From the desktop. Test. Open. And when that comes across into Revit, have you not worked? Brilliant. I'm going to try one more time. Manage links. Manage links. And you, reload. Okay. Great. The best part of the demo, and it didn't work properly, but what I'm going to do is before this goes up on YouTube, I'm going to do that again because that's just going to frustrate me, and I'm going to sit here and wonder why that hasn't worked. Because it's meant to come across in the same place, which I know why. They're not constrained, are they? Yeah, that's never going to work. Okay, so make sure you constrain them. Don't leave them floating because that won't work, and then they'll be constrained around the building. But what you get is the ability to link those back in. So in summary then, we can take a product in Inventor, we can export it to either the same or more realistically, a simplified level of detail. We can then take that and produce a Revit file natively. Or we can build a bigger project, we can model that in place with the coordination tools, not like I've just done it. And with that model in place, we can then model it around the building, use the constraint tools in Inventor, and then create a file that can be linked and controlled back into Revit in the way that you would want to as part of a project. And on that note, that's kind of me done. So I'm going to hand back over to Nathan to close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was a great session. It was really good to look at in terms of that connectivity between the native authoring tool and taking it into the Revit file or the Revit format that can be delivered to the client. So I know that we're going to answer questions in a couple of minutes, but just a final few points from me to finish off the BIM for manufacturing session. So where do we actually fit into this? Now, within Man and Machine, we can support you from very much the starting point all the way through to actually get you to where you need to be. That's as much or as little as you want. We can help you and support you on your journey. I'm not going to explain all of these areas in detail, but there is one part which I do want to talk about. That's in terms, obviously, what we're here to talk about this afternoon, like what do we actually offer from Man and Machine's point of view from our BIM ready services. Now, whether you're looking at coordination, you're looking at ultimately just upskilling the team to understand the fundamentals in terms of the workshops we offer, business certification, actually looking at Revit training, because I appreciate whilst Rob was using two programs and taking it from Inventor to Revit, Revit's often very new to people, and actually being able to help you create those families, that information, and being able to actually get you delivering what it is you require. We can also support in terms of business or the actual consultancy and business assessment. That could be specifically from looking at BIM adoption, digital adoption within your organisation, but it can be much more holistically as well in terms of that business process assessment if required. So how do you actually take on, or how do you actually adopt BIM? Where do I go from here? I need to produce this information. I've been asked by my clients to actually do this. We've tried to do it before, we haven't quite got there. Doesn't matter, we can help you. We always follow a tried and tested approach. The first step is to understand actually what is it that you're trying to do. Okay, you need to produce this information, fine, okay, or you need to produce this information, you need to work in the environment, actually do much more in detail collaboration with your clients. That's fine. I'd always say, again, as I mentioned on my last slide before Robin was on, look at this holistically. Set up your digital working group, your BIM working group, and give them an understanding of actually what BIM means. So just a crash course in terms of what it means for your organisation, the core standards, everything that's required, and then actually train the team. Get them on a day's training. We offer that ourselves, we can do that for you, but do some training. Once you know the core elements, then it's a case of actually starting to work out where the organisation needs to get to. Again, we can do that. A lot of clients like to do that themselves, but we can come in and out as and when required. We do have some businesses at this moment in time that are asking us to do that for them. Now, depending upon whether you're a product design workflow or it's a product design workflow, or whether it's actually looking at that design-based environment, you now start to follow additional steps. So setting up BIM policies, project documentation. If you're just producing the product, okay, you're clearly not going to need to take these steps. You might need to do certain things in there, but ultimately you'll probably come back in at the final point where it's more about the software, that adoption piece, getting it customized, getting it configured, and actually ultimately getting it how you need it to be. If you're looking at it from a point of view where you take on that design responsibility, then you're going to need to actually follow some of these elements. We can't say for certain in terms of every single part that's required, but ultimately it's about actually fulfilling what's required from your clients. So on that note, I know that we've had a few questions, so I think we're running quite tight for time. We're definitely going to take those offline, and Rob and I will come back to you. But ultimately, I hope you enjoyed today's session, and hopefully we'll see you for one in the future. Take care.